All right. So when it comes to supplementation, specifically when we're working with anyone really, we need to think about contextually, why are we doing this? And usually it's just a methodology we have so we can fill in the gaps. So are we deficient in something, so we need a way to add it? Now, there are certain supplements that are going to enhance performance in different contexts. And so we're going to apply it on occasion, but still keeping in mind, is it really necessary with the athlete we're working with? And specifically, most supplements aren't really going to be necessary when we're working with pretty much anyone. Instead, we want to focus on just having effectively eating a diet that has enough whole food options that we're getting everything we really need. Now, obviously, some folks are going for really high levels of performance, and in those situations, okay, we have our caveats. And then as far as what we can all do is just be honest with ourselves about our diet and our goals to get ourselves where we need to be. So for example, when someone asks me about supplementation and, should they take this product or that product, my first question to them is, did you eat breakfast today? And if they didn't eat breakfast, then you don't need to worry about supplementation, just worry about eating. Okay, did you ate breakfast, you ate lunch, you ate dinner, good. Did you do some type of peri-workout nutrition? Do you do a snack or otherwise? No, then let's work on that first, then we'll look at supplementation. Now, once they have all those other ducks in a row, they've got their total calories, their macros, got everything broken down. Okay, now let's get granular. Now let's figure out what supplements might be useful given what that individual is trying to perform. So athletes are obviously going to take supplements for a variety of reasons, some of which are just maintenance of health. That can be due to excessive loss of certain macronutrients. We can get really granular when it comes to what is a supplement. And so some folks would say doing salt packets, doing Gatorade as a supplement. So yeah, go figure, sweating a lot, do it. Whereas obviously we can talk about using things like protein supplements as a means to help with that recovery. When it comes to immune function and reduce illness risk, we're talking about some folks using large amounts of vitamins. Specifically, they think B vitamins and zinc is going to solve the problem, which it does if you have a deficiency. Same thing with vitamin C. And then also maybe even a little bit with going large amounts in glutamine. Now, obviously, we've got the good old changing our body composition in the direction we want to help ourselves with sleep. So some folks are going to use magnesium, melatonin, theanine, other types of supplements to help themselves essentially turn it down. And then we are going to use supplements to improve our cognitive performance and exercise performance. So what's the most commonly abused supplement or drug, if we're really going to get down to it, out there that people use on a daily basis? What do you guys think that is? You think the most commonly abused drug is steroids?
Caffeine.
Thank you, Celia. We pray to the almighty God that is Starbucks, and may she lift us up every day with her amphetamines. Paige, Taylor, I want to know who you're hanging out with. You see that many people loading up a syringe of test and driving that into their muscle bellies. But I sure as hell see my coworkers, see my students walking into class with their carafe of coffee, which I don't need the coffee, but if I don't have the coffee, I swear to God, I'm going to kill someone. Like, okay, you don't have a drug problem. But if we took the drug away from you, would you maybe get shakes? Would you maybe feel bad? But that's also part of the joys of no. Just because you aren't buff doesn't mean you don't know people who are using anabolic aids or otherwise. But keep in mind, guys, caffeine is going to be the most heavily abused supplement out there. And yeah, it has its efficacy. It also has its dependency. And guys, I want you to guess, me standing here lecturing from home with occasionally a cat rubbing up against my leg is a little soul crushing. So I'm always happy to hear you guys say anything. Now, before we use any supplements, we need to keep in mind, okay, is this something that's filling in a block that we wouldn't have? So remember we talked about really strict vegan diets where we might have some issues with iron levels and maybe a couple of the B vitamins. Good, let's supplement it, let's go with it. We've got a weight class athlete or someone that's trying to cut weight, like, okay, let's use a multivitamin or something so we can go ahead and improve when they're in those caloric deficits. Now, notice the second bullet here, guys. This is not to be the fix because they're eating like a D-ball or D-ball. D-ball steroids, haha, D-bag, where they're going and they're doing pixie sticks, cans of tuna fish, and straight butter for their macros. And so they have pretty much no vitamins or minerals. So then we're going to have to fill that in all with supplementation. Like, let's, once again, whole food, variety of sources, go for it. So if we're going to look into supplements, let's look at how much money we're spending on them. And then let's look into how much they're going to really enhance our performance. So on top of that, there is that risk of failing drug tests. And I'll tell you straightforward, the athletes that fail drug tests are the ones that didn't know how to pass a drug test or accidentally were taking drugs and they didn't know they were taking them. There is a lot of athletes that take drugs and can get around drug tests. Lance Armstrong, guys, was the most heavily drug tested athlete of all time. How many drug tests did Lance Armstrong fail in his competitive cycling career? Go and take a shot, guys. Put up a guess in the chat. Hopefully I'm going to discourage you guys from, he didn't fail one. And that dude was loaded to the gills. Guys, passing a drug test is easy if you know what you're doing. So the quick analogy I can give you guys there before we go back into this, which is if you guys knew you would be expelled from school if you ever failed a breathalyzer test. But we're going to let you know when you have to do those breathalyzer tests. It's not, where someone's driving under the influence, they pull them over, breath test, fail, and congratulations, you're not a big enough adult, mature enough to drive a car, we take away your license. Instead, you know when you have to come in a drug test. So if you know when you have to come in a drug test, you plan your drug use appropriately so it's out of your system. So if you know you guys have to show up to campus and at 9 a.m. you have to take a blood alcohol test and you're going to do, through breath tests or otherwise, last drink you can have might be 1 or 2 in the morning. You can go get pretty hammered in the early afternoon and you'll pass that test with flying colors the next morning. So the key is timing the drug use. And that's what athletes do. Manny Ramirez, Barry Bonds, and the list goes on. Obviously I went with pro baseball, but yeah, anyways. Now, there's a big issue with the lack of regulation when it comes to nutritional supplements. So you want to see supplements that have third-party, essentially testing to show that whatever's in there is actually what's on the bottle. So you're not getting anything that's not supposed to be in you that's going to potentially give yourself some issues. Hey, remember folks, it's a business. They are there to stay in business. So sometimes they don't want to know. If Major League Baseball really cared that much about drug use, they would do things very differently, but they're interested in making money. And it turns out home run hitters make the money. But once again, the non-regulation of the nutrition supplement companies is something you should be aware of. So they can make a lot of claims. They can put things on the bottle that aren't actually well tested and can potentially have some negative health outcomes from using different substances. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. Okay. Now, when we're looking at the research, which is where we should start, we need to keep in mind context. Okay. What are we really trying to do? What's the population? Is it even humans? Is it animals? Is it cell cultures? And then with the population, is it even your age group? Is it even your gender? Is it going to be something that's going to really correlate to what you do? And then, okay, it's your age group and it's your gender. Is it your training status? Are the people in the study very well trained? Are the people in the study not very well trained? What is it being compared to? So when I say comparison, as in some of the, I'm sure you guys at some point, have any of you guys heard about chocolate milk? And what would you say you've been told chocolate milk is good for when it comes to sports performance or otherwise? Yeah, post-workout to do what, Paige? You're not wrong, Abby. Yeah, to help you put on muscle mass. Now, the research showing that chocolate milk is such a great post-exercise drink is usually comparing it to water or just protein without carbohydrates, which, go figure, when you compare chocolate milk to protein powder with a good, easily digestible carbohydrate, it's no better. the key thing is it's going to come down to that good old, are we giving the equivalent amount of calories? Okay, if we're giving the equivalent amount of calories, is the protein source really that different? Okay, randomization, meaning that it's being done in a random order. Crossover design, meaning those individuals serve as their own control, because sometimes you might get a lot of really high responders in the supplement group and a bunch of low responders in the placebo group. And go figure, the high responders do better because that's what high responders do. And is there more than one study? If there's only one study, I would never bet the farm on that. And we're going to get to that more in a few moments. And it better be freaking peer reviewed. It's easy to put copy out there to say like, oh yeah, these are totally the drugs that really work and they're great and they're awesome. And if you don't get it, you'll never get huge. But in reality, it's easy for there to be a lot of much ado about nothing. So a lot of the huperzine and alpha GPC talking about how it helps improve your performance if you take it as a pre-workout. We did that research in the lab, didn't work. So fun stuff. So when you're reading those studies, is the hypothesis clear? We obviously touched upon this of, is this appropriate for the individuals being taken to? Is it placebo controlled? Are other variables controlled? So there's not other confounding lifestyle effects that are going. And are they really looking at what they think they're looking at? And yes, do other studies corroborate what they came up with? So are you seeing a lot of supplement studies that are showing this works? Okay. What was the type of exercise, the intensity exercise that they were using? Is that relative to what you're trying to do? What type of population? Okay. Hasn't been shown to really be useful in a real sport. It's one thing to look at things like we've looked at in this class, which is to fatigue. Sports are not played to fatigue. They're played to who scores the most goals, who finishes first. So time trials are a lot better. And then obviously performance and sport metrics are really important. The thing that a lot of people screw up, and this is what pre-workouts do a great job of hiding in, that most folks don't know enough to know they're being screwed over and being charged a lot of money for things that don't work, is what is the effective dose? Okay. If I gave all of you guys 1 gram of protein, is that enough protein that it's going to make a difference in how much muscle mass you're going to put on? One gram of protein. No. If I give you 1 milligram, definitely not going to work. If I gave you 1 kilogram, that's a lot of protein. In fact, it's going to be a little daunting to do in one day. But it's important to understand, okay, are we giving enough that it's going to work? And so we want to look at not just raw dosage, but dosage relative to body mass, milligrams per kilogram. Okay. Mode of action is really the mechanism. So we should be able to explain how things work. If at any point, and Jake, this sounds familiar from hopefully physiology of activity on Wednesday, if we ever use the term magic, then we've lost the ship. We're looking at what's the real mechanism of action, what's driving these changes. And if we can't discern a very specific A causes B, we're losing our mind. And then another thing to keep in mind is side effects, especially the things that really work that are often illegal, and some that are quasi-legal, which we'll get to in a bit. Is the side effects worth what you're getting from it? Now, who can tell me what that's a picture of in the bottom right corner of the slide here? Yes, typically a die used in things like Dungeons and Dragons. Absolutely, it's a 20-sided dice. Okay. Now, when we say that something was statistically significant and we set a p-value at 0.05, what does that mean, guys? If the p-value is 0.05. How many of you guys have had enough stats that you even have a good working knowledge of what I'm putting out right now? Or is this all kind of sounds like I'm speaking a foreign language? That's okay. And I appreciate you giving me some feedback there, Abby. Okay. So a p-value of 0.05. what we effectively mean is we take a random sampling of two separate groups, okay? The chance that group A will be significantly different than group B, just based on random luck, is at 5%, or like the die in the corner, a 1 in 20 chance, okay? So when you do research, obviously you're hoping that you're going to find a significant difference between the two groups at a rate of, where you're not going to make the mistake more than 1 out of 20 times. Now, the reality is, if every lab is all running the same study, so we get 20 labs that are all running the same study, and in reality, the supplement doesn't do a damn thing, 1 out of 20 of them is going to find statistically significant results on accident. And then I want you guys to guess who gets published, which then the supplement company is more than happy to put up on their label. Bingo, Cass, the one that's significant. So keep in mind, if we only see 1 article, 2 articles that shows that a supplement works, hold the phone. We need to wait until we see 10, 20, 30. There are literally thousands of articles, actually tens of thousands of articles that show that caffeine effing works, and so does creatine. But a lot of the more exotic stuff you see on the market these days, guys, it's not true. That work hasn't been done. So keep in mind, yes, we want to look for things that are effective, but we do want to be mindful of, okay, how much efficacy do things really have? Now, things that do work. Beetroot juice, and we're talking nitrates, that's going to work with vasodilation. That works. That's good for just improving blood flow to muscles and, well, other areas of the body as well. Beta-alanine is going to combine with the amino acid histidine to increase intramuscular carnosine levels. And carnosine works to be an intramuscular buffer. So whenever we start to generate a lot of lactate from hard work otherwise, we're going to tolerate it much better. Caffeine, you're pretty familiar with. Carnitine, where it increases fatty acid mobility and motility and a little bit for energy production, okay? Carnosine itself, when taking in with arnisine, is going to also help increase intramuscular carnosine levels. The key is, when you digest carnosine, you break it into beta-alanine and histidine, and then you can put it back together later. One of those things, it's kind of more steps to do the same thing. Creatine increases muscle creatine levels, has positive effects on energy levels in the cell, along with potentially signaling for more muscle mass. Sodium bicarbonate is going to be useful specifically for that buffering of our blood pH levels, and then sodium nitrate. Now, the things that don't work is really effing long, and we're going to touch on a bunch of them kind of rapid fire as we're going through, as well as, notice, guys, I put a little thing in parentheses there, which is we're talking about the legal supplements. If we're going to get a bit more exotic, which is when I'm going to hit stop on the record button, we can go there and have that conversation at the end. But in the reality, you don't want to play with fire unless you really know what you're doing. So here's the tables from your text of all the stuff that doesn't really work. Don't worry, we're going to go through it pretty quick, rapid fire. Now, androstenedione, this was essentially a precursor to testosterone. So it's kind of pro-hormone. It actually does work because it increases testosterone levels, but it's hard on the liver, as well as it's not legal anymore. Now, we're going to talk about 1-AD and other pro-hormones as a class later on. I mean, a class of chemicals that you can use. The key thing is, whenever you ingest andro or masterdol, superdrol, any of those oral pro-hormones, your liver has to detoxify it first, and that's hard on your liver. And so, yeah, it's just one little modification away from being testosterone. But then when we massively increase our testosterone, we've got downregulation of our essentially axis through that part of the body, which in turn is going to have negative effects on our normal testosterone levels, especially male or female. And then obviously females, you're going to get a little bit more androgenized. So you win some, you lose some, I guess, right? Bee pollen is hilarious as a potential thing. So just go shove your face in a bunch of flowers. Chrysin is one of the more essentially purified methods, which in turn is going to potentially help with decreasing estrogen levels. Not really something that has that great of efficacy, but you will see that being marketed on occasion. Now, when it comes to beetroot juice, or really we're talking about that sodium nitrate, so that's going to give us those nitrates, which in turn is going to give us a vasodilatory effect. And this is something specifically we're getting a lot from vegetables. And by taking in enough of this before essentially aerobic exercise, something that requires a lot of work, it in turn is going to help with increasing blood flow. Now, what's fascinating is the bacteria naturally in your mouth convert that nitrate into nitrite, and some, which will in turn be into nitric oxide. Remember, nitric oxide is that major vasodilator. So what it's going to help do is allow us to have better blood flow to our muscles and allow us to in turn get more oxygen there. So the Fick equation of how much we're able to take up is going to improve. So we don't actually have to have as high of a cardiac output. So it's going to make things a little bit more tolerable. Okay. So it's going to help with aerobic performance in moderate durations. Now, what's fascinating is you're going to lose these effects if you happen to be doing massive amounts of mouthwash, because you actually kill the natural bacteria in your mouth and you're not going to have that conversion anymore because they don't exist. So still brush and floss, don't get me wrong, but high levels of mouthwash is actually being related to higher blood pressure because this stuff actually helps lower blood pressure. Now, in theory, this might help a little bit with mitochondrial oxidative metabolism being a little bit more efficient. And this is something you want to take effectively over longer periods of time so you get the full effect here. Now, like anything else, if we happen to be utilizing this supplement, we need to do it chronically to get a full effect. Keep in mind, whenever we're talking about supplements, some supplements are really good acutely, caffeine. Other supplements, sodium nitrate, beetroot juice, beta-alanine, creatine, you need to take consistently for a longer period of time before it's going to really have a really effective amount of, or a significant effect on your performance. And you still need to always keep in mind individual effects. Some folks get more, some folks get less. Now, beta-alanine and carnosine, remember, that's where we're going to work as a buffering component, having higher carnosine levels inside the muscle. Arnisine is a analog, which in turn helps a little bit with salvaging a little bit more of the carnosine through digestion. So that's very recent literature as far as research in that area that might be worth playing around with your own supplementation there. And this is something you need to take over and over again. Now, if you take it in giant bolus, it's going to give you what's known as paresthesia. And paresthesia is a little bit uncomfortable. You kind of get that tingling on your face, but this is what the bros go for when they're taking pre-workout. In reality, guys, I'm not a big fan of doing cocaine. I mean, I haven't done it, but I've seen people do it, but I still wouldn't suggest doing it just because it is one of those situations when we're doing pre-workouts and it's got that kitchen sink, everything in there, specifically a lot of amphetamines. Amphetamines are something that we habituate to, meaning as we take it over time, we get less and less of an effect of using it. Whereas beta-alanine, beetroot, creatine, if we take it consistently more and more, we eventually top off our levels, but that's going to give us the biggest effect on our performance. So personally, I used to use beta-alanine in the 1 month running up to strongman competitions because it would improve my anaerobic endurance and allow me to do like a couple more reps or allow me to go a little bit further or faster with the implements when I'd be competing, and use divided doses over the day. If you do a massive bolus, that's where you get that paresthesia, or do buffered beta-alanine as well. Okay. HMB, or beta hydroxybeta methylbutyrate, is a, notice guys, it's going to be a metabolite of leucine. Now, that's where you see alpha keto isocapriate, which I said there's also HICA, which is another metabolite of leucine. This is fascinating because what it does is it helps to signal the body to not go through as much atrophy. So the research in using greater amounts of HMB actually has been efficacious when it comes to strength and lean body mass, but a lot of it is from older individuals. So this is one of those that, yeah, HMB seems to work, but it only really works once you're in your 60s. Because right now, you guys don't have an issue with your catabolism, but someone's going to grow up. And yes, Josh, I would take beta alanine every single day when I would do that. It's a relatively inexpensive supplement. It goes in solution really easily. It doesn't really have much of a taste that really bothers me. Whenever I do my supplementation, I mostly work with single ingredients, just because then you can really get a feel for, like, is this working, is this not? Yeah, flat out, guys, I haven't been off creatine in years, but like I take creatine all the freaking time. And we'll get to the reasons why in a few. But if you guys want to know kind of the other things that I play around with on occasion, be more than happy to talk at length. Now, boron is funny because that is a rate limiter when it comes to testosterone production. And if you're doing a lot of zinc and copper, you can sometimes have issues with competition. Doesn't really have that big of an effect. Your testosterone levels, gentlemen, right now are probably as high as they're ever going to be. That's why I thoroughly suggest all of you get a full endocrine panel done, and that includes the ladies as well, so you have that information, so you can look back when you're older and try to optimize yourself. But yeah, you guys don't need test boosters right now. We'll talk more in person if you're concerned. Caffeine, everybody's favorite drug. Now, we have the total amount of milligrams of caffeine we can have in different types of drugs, depending on what we're doing. Now, the key thing is caffeine effing works, but the notice we want to focus on our dosage, where really we get our best performance increase in between 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body mass. Notice, guys, from Passman and all in 95, 5, 9, and 13 milligrams per kilogram had no increased performance in exercise and fatigue. In fact, what they find is once you go over 6 milligrams per kilogram, the negative effects of caffeine, so the anxiety, the jitters, and otherwise that can come with it, overrides the positive effects that you're getting from using caffeine. And it's something that can easily become habituated. Caffeine helps with, obviously, alertness, blocking adenosine accumulation, or at least the sense of drowsiness. It's going to decrease perceptions of pain. It's going to increase the availability of fatty acids for metabolism. And it's going to help a little bit with power and essentially force output. Now, it also seems to help a little bit with carbohydrate absorption. There is some debates, which needs to be further examined, of whether or not caffeine and creatine compete with one another. So it's in that large amounts of caffeine actually decreases the efficacy of how much creatine you're gonna be able to take up into the muscles. And it turns out the key difference between caffeine and just doing coffee is, well, caffeine is an herb, so you have some other herbal components. You get theobromide and some other essential metabolites that are relatively similar. That's actually what's going to be pictured here. It's just pure caffeine. And obviously caffeine has some side effects. How many of you guys know you can't do a large volume of caffeine, or it's just going to jack you up? You're going to be too jittery. You're not going to feel good. You're not going to want to do anything other than like feel like your body's on vibrate mode. Yeah. So it's like anything else. You got to figure out the dosage that works for the person, and you don't have to do it. Now, caffeine has a major habituation effect. How many of you guys are probably putting down, especially when we look at the numbers up here, notice it's got the Starbucks values there, of literally hundreds of milligrams of caffeine each day, and you don't feel a bump anymore. It does nothing for you. Ah, yes. Thank you, guys. And that's okay. Key is that's where cycling your caffeine consumption is more useful. Supplements that give you a lot and then give you less as you take them chronically, those are the ones to cycle. Ones that get you to a point where you obviously are making greater progress, that are habitual users, or you need to use them habitually to get the greatest efficacy, those are the ones you stay on, so to speak. And you can still cycle off and see if that influences your performance. Now, carnitine, remember guys, that's what's helping shuttle fatty acids into the cells, which in theory is going to help a little bit with potentially improving beta oxidation a little bit. If we can improve beta oxidation a little bit, we're going to be able to metabolize calories a little bit faster and increase our performance. Now, obviously, it's something you see in a lot of energy drinks and some other supplements. And really, we're just trying to make it so that we have effectively the total essentially gradient we have so we move things through. Now, I'm sure you guys have seen choline before. Alpha glycerylphosphocholone, alpha GPC, is one that's been marketed more recently to increase nervous system performance, specifically power output, and maybe a little bit with reaction time. Like I said, we looked at it and we didn't really see anything. But citicoline, which I believe is sold in the trade name of Cognizant, is seemingly having some positive effects on neurological health. So choline might be more of a health component than really getting performance. And if you want choline cheap, just eat eggs. Plenty of choline in there. Okay. Chromium, specifically chromium picolinate, has had potential properties of increasing insulin sensitivity. It's definitely not something that you need to do, but just be aware of. I'm sure some of you guys have seen CoQ10, which is just coenzyme Q10, which is important in essentially the electron transport chain. And so supplementing with it seems to potentially have positive effects on essentially heart health and a little bit with circulation. It's one of those that this is more maybe long-term health. The efficacy isn't really there yet. Obviously, it's nowhere near as potent as when people play with metformin to increase longevity, which we might touch on later, but we're not getting into because then we're talking pharmaceutical agents, and I get a little uncomfortable about it. Creatine is effing useful and it works. So in your livers and in your kidneys, you're going to take glycine, combine with arginine, combine that with methionine, boom, you got creatine. Creatine goes in the bloodstream. It goes not just to your muscles, but it actually goes to your heart and your brain. So that's why I take creatine all the time, because creatine is important, not just for, yes, we get a little bit more swole, we increase muscle mass, we have a little bit better endurance in the shortest of energy system, that ATP PCR, but it also gives us another energetic source inside of our brain. Because remember, guys, aside from doing that quick interconversion we're going to have, it in turn is going to help give us more energy availability. So when it comes to supplementation, we're only talking about, in a chronic amount, 3 to maybe 5 grams a day. There's some folks that do creatine loading, and that's what you can see in this picture down lower, where yes, they're going to top out their creatine levels really rapidly. But if you take essentially a smaller amount over longer periods of time, you're eventually going to hit that same level of saturation. You just didn't do it in a week. And essentially those that did it in a week, congratulations, your muscles got fuller faster, which if you're just trying to look good and flex on people, go for it. But if your goal is like everyone else with long-term training goals, we just are going to use less product in that same month than if we just loaded and then hit our top there. And then we can just keep rolling with that for however much longer. Some folks go up to 5, maybe even 10 grams of creatine a day, but that's going to be more when you're really looking at folks that are real big. Now, also with creatine, there is going to, aside from that water weight gain, because we're increasing osmolarity, so we have to pull more fluid into the cell, always keep in mind with every single supplement out there, guys, there's high responders, low responders, or people that respond and people that don't respond. So you can try creatine and then realize, like, I didn't really get anything out of it. That's fine. Stop using it. Creatine itself is really cheap. It's something you can buy a huge amount of, and barely, you can buy like a year's supply for what's going to equate for maybe 10, 20 bucks. It's not expensive. However, there's obviously a lot of more interesting potions and powders out there that folks are going to spend a lot more money on that don't have anywhere near the efficacy. So it's pretty safe. The only issues that are effectively out there with essentially a grade or with people taking creatine is sometimes with dehydration. And that's usually people that are doing unsafe practice in the first place, aka wrestlers wearing sweatsuits, running up and down the stairs in a heated area while they're cutting back water. So yeah, that's freaking dumb. And that can maybe exacerbate the situation. But if you're drinking water, you're fine. Some of you guys might find yourself bloating a little too much on it. If you don't like the effects, don't do it. Just stop. It's not really going to give you any major negative outcomes that you really got to be worried about. But when we increase the creatine level, we cause cellular swelling. Cellular swelling sometimes signal for more muscle mass, which is cool, as well as, once again, it's going to allow us to do more work, which in turn is going to allow us to have a bigger stimulus on the muscle, which in turn is going to help the muscles get bigger. So DHEA is a precursor to testosterone. And so some folks will supplement with this as a means to increase their testosterone levels. It seems to potentially work a little bit in older individuals, doesn't really work in young individuals. And at the end of the day, you're also potentially going to convert this into cortisol, which is just going to be more stress hormone. So I would not really play with it if you can help. Now, omega-3 fatty acids we've talked about before, their potential usefulness, specifically DHA and EPA, DHA for more nervous system function, and then EPA for more of its anti-inflammatory properties. The long-term research here says that it might decrease your risk of heart attack and increase your longevity. It's relatively cheap, or you could just eat the fish. And obviously there's algae related ones, but there is some potential positive effects in utilizing this for recovering from brain injury and supplementing with fish oil as a means to help get the nervous system repair itself faster. So personally, it's one that's also not too terribly expensive, probably should be part of a good overall healthy diet, and might have some positive effects on long-term health. I'm sure a number of you guys have seen ginseng, which is more of an Ayurvedic medicine coming from the Far East, with the idea of it's having positive effects on just general overall health, neural health as well. A little bit of research out there. The problem with ginseng is there's a lot of variability. There's a lot of different individual types of plants in that family, and then how it's farmed, how it's developed. The active, essentially chemicals in there aren't very well titrated out, so you can really be like, this is the part of ginseng that's really enhancing performance. Good. I'm glad the carnitine had an effect whenever you were going through and doing raw performance. I think we're going to get kicked out again, guys, but we'll come back, obviously, once we get kicked out. We talked about glycerol and its ability for folks to be able to hold a little bit more water, aside from obviously being that part of the triglyceride that we can also go through gluconeogenesis. This is something that's going to help with obviously having a bit more water in us, specifically if we're going to do a really long distance run activity and we might not have access to water. And even some bodybuilders use it to pull a little bit more water, sometimes into the muscles to make them look a bit better. It's just one of the things to play around with. Inosine used to be one of the required B vitamins, but it's not really something that you see much anymore because it's not really necessary for health. It might have a little bit of an effect on effectively relaxation and helping people calm down, and a little bit with other functions in the body, but isn't really something you need to worry about with supplementation. Lactate salts and polylactates are fascinating because remember, guys, when it comes to lactate, it's a carbohydrate, and specifically it uses a different transporter than both glucose, galactose, and fructose. So it's a 3-carbon sugar. We can get into the bloodstream, do it orally. Problem is lactate has baggage. So that's something that a lot of people don't do, and they're a little bit more afraid of to try to utilize for supplementation. Now, can work a little bit, maybe hasn't been heavily researched. Some companies have tried to market it. It rarely ever goes well when they're trying to put it out there. Soy lecithin and otherwise might help a little bit with decreasing LDL, improving HDL. It's not really going to be, it's more of a binder, which is actually put in a lot of different foods, which is fascinating.